main character. The main character is Moses. Now Moses starts in the story real young, because when he is in the womb and about to be born, there is a mass genocide going on. And the Egyptians are terrified of the power of the people that they are oppressing. They're slave people because they're having babies so fast. They're afraid they're going to be overwhelmed, and so they are slaughtering the children. They are throwing all the boys in the river Nile. And Moses' mother hides him, puts him in a basket, floats him out in the river where the princess will find him. She finds him. He ends up being raised, adopted as a prince. And then at one point he can't take it anymore, and he identifies with his people, and he tries to do something about it, and it doesn't go well, and he ends up in the wilderness. And he's there for 40 years. And that's where it's going to pick up. And I got some questions for Moses as we get into chapter 3. Moses, Moses, Moses. What are you doing out here in the hot sun? You don't belong out here, Moses, keeping sheep alive out in some godforsaken country. Aren't you tired of doing this every day? 40 years is a long time to be mindlessly trailing sheep looking for grass out in the wilderness, especially for somebody with your education, somebody with your resume, somebody with your pedigree out here walking around behind sheep all day long. What do you think about as you stand out here in the sun and watch the sheep? You still think about Egypt? Does your mind go back and you think about life in the palace? And you think about the cuisine and the comforts back home? Do you think about the servant that would come and bring you your food and come and bring you your drink, and the time you'd go hang out in the library or you would go down to the pool? Do you miss the praise of the people as they would celebrate Moses as you'd ride your BMW chariot down the road and everybody would say, there he goes, there he goes? Do you kick yourself for caring about the Hebrews instead of continuing to pass as an Egyptian? You see, they didn't care about you. Why should you care about them? Moses, do you still see the face of that Egyptian slave master that you murdered? What got into you, Moses? What made you think that you could make a difference all by yourself? Even though you were a prince, you were only an adopted prince. Did you think that one adopted Hebrew prince could change the whole system of Egypt? What got into you, Moses? What made you take such a rash action? What came over you as you watched that sweaty overlord whip the flesh off of a Hebrew slave? What made you say, I'm one of them instead of like him? Did you expect all the Hebrews to rise up and mass revolt behind you, and you're going to lead some kind of rebellion? Moses, why would they trust you? You look like an Egyptian. You dress like an Egyptian. You know better now, don't you? You know you can't just identify with your people and all of a sudden they're going to rise up and follow you. Moses, do you still wake up in a cold sweat at night and see blood on your hands? Do you still see blood sinking into the sand? Do you still dream of burying that man while praying nobody saw you and nobody's going to snitch on you? Moses, what's it like to go into your tent every night, scraping the lamb droppings off of your sandals before you climb into that tent with your Midianite wife after growing up on the marble floors of Pharaoh's palace? What would your fellow Hebrews say if they saw you married to a Midianite woman? Would they accept her? You know your mama, your Egyptian mama, she wouldn't accept that woman. How far you have fallen, Moses. How much you have paid because in that one moment you cared about justice. You had so much potential. If you'd have just gone along, if you'd have just passed, you had so much potential, and here you are wasting your life in a dead-end job in the middle of nowhere. You could have been something. You could have made a difference. You could have made different choices. But here you are, 80 years old. Do you still think about your people back in Egypt? Do you think about your family? Do you think about Miriam and Moses and their children? under the whip in Egypt? Do you ever feel the impulse to go back and hope maybe the statute of limitations has expired? Do you ever dream of leading a revolution now? I don't know, Moses. I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Moses, you should hear what's happening in our country today. Oh, you'd recognize an awful lot of it. It hadn't changed all that much. Police shootings, chokings, protests, riots, all in the middle of a pandemic. It just seems like constant terror. It's a mess. 3,300 years later, it's hard to keep your eye on the prize. There's still no evil people won't do to stay in power or to keep money. And they want to wrap it in the flag, and they want to wrap it in the will of God, and they want to blame the victims. That evil, it doesn't go away. It just adapts, and it adapts, and it adapts. Yeah, it's probably a good thing you got out of Egypt with your skin intact, Moses. It's a good thing you got out when you did. Just go somewhere else. It's good you gave up on your dream of saving your people. It's good you came out here where God can't even find you. Because after 400 silent years since Joseph, who can believe that Abraham's children are God's chosen people? Chosen for what? Endless labor, whips on their backs, nonstop suffering. If that's what it means to be the chosen of God, let God pick somebody else. You don't belong anywhere except out here by yourself, trailing these stinking sheep. Well, those are my questions for Moses. I don't know about you, but this is how I picture Moses after 40 years in Sinai. That is, when I think about him as a real person instead of a cartoon character or a Hollywood hero. He didn't look anything like Charleston Heston, so just get that out of your mind. But it's hard to think of Moses as a real man with normal hopes and dreams and needs, but that's what he was. We've seen too many flannel graph stories, too many children's Bibles, too many coloring sheets with a white Moses, as if there were white people in the Bible. But if there was no real Moses, there would be no church today. And we're here because God appeared to that man, that washed-up revolutionary who'd given up hope out in the desert. Now let's read the story from Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, well, I'll go over and see what this strange sight is, why this bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy ground. And then he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned, I care about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I'll be with you, and this will be the sign that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, well, what is his name? Then what am I to tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. Well, something happened on that barren mountain in Sinai called Horeb, which means wasteland. Something that changed everything. It changed our lives today. It's going to change the world to come. God showed up after 400 years. After 400 years. Same number of time it's been since 1619. 400 years. And he answered the question that God wouldn't answer of Jacob when Jacob wrestled with him and said, what is your name? He would not tell him, but he told Moses, my name. God revealed his name and his character, and he exposed the fact that cynicism is a lie. And to everyone's surprise, even Moses' surprise, turns out God was not far away. God was not unconcerned. He knew and he cared about everyone. He was ready to act, and he was not going to act alone. This is the God who revealed himself to Moses. This is the God who reveals himself to us. And the question for you is, do you know this God? Not do you know a God? Do you know about God? Have you heard something of God? The question is, do you know this God? Do you know his name? And when you call his name, do you hear him call your name? Because he calls you back when you call on him. Has that fire that burned that bush and did not consume it burned your heart and not consumed it yet? Does it burn in your heart unending? Because according to Moses, to know God, to learn his name, is to learn that he does not just exist, but he cares, he commits, and he calls us to kick in with him. This God, this great I am, he listens. He sees. He knows. Not just what's happening in your life. He sees what's happening in the world around us. This God, this same God, he chooses to be with those who trust that he hasn't abandoned them. He doesn't just know our hurt like a scientist knows a theory or a mathematician knows an equation. He knows our hurt like a nursing mother knows the hurt of a hungry baby crying in the next room. He feels the pain in his self, in his heart. This is the God who will not be defined, who defines himself. He says, I am not just looking, I'm not just watching it on the screen, I am involved. I am coming up down there, and I am going to get things straightened out. And he doesn't just make promises, he says, I keep them. He never forgets what he said, no matter how long it may be. He listens and he hears the cries of the hurting. He hears the cries of the oppressed. He hears the cries of the abandoned and the broken. He sees every injustice and he says, I'm going to make it right. Now let me tell you, I cannot believe in a God who is too nice to establish justice on the earth, because that is not the God of the Bible. And to meet this God and to learn his name and to know that he exists is to understand that he takes sides. He gets involved and he acts to change the world. He takes sides. He takes sides not with the people the world think are blessed, but who did Jesus say was the blessed people? Who are blessed? Those who mourn, those who are persecuted, those who are poor, those who have not, those who are the meek. He takes sides. He takes sides with the oppressed against their oppressors. Now I know when people who look like me in this country read this passage, we tend to identify with Israel and we think we're Israel. Unfortunately, too often, we are Egypt. You know who is Israel in this story? The oppressed, the powerless. That is who God takes sides with. And when he rises to act, he is not going to move alone. He is not going to work by himself, because when he rises, he calls us to join him. And he works through people like Abraham and people like Isaac and people like Jacob and people like Moses. And if you think they were special and unlike you, you have not read your Bible. These were people who were flawed. These were people who made incredible mistakes. These are people who were not worthy. And the only thing they were sure of when God called them, the only thing they knew for certain, is they were not qualified to change the world. But when God called, they picked up. People just like you. People just like me. People tempted to give up on our world ever changing. Now it's been 50 years since Dr. King talked about his dream. And we still haven't seen that dream realized, have we? And we may say, oh, it's too long, too long, too long. Listen, God is not giving up, and we're not going to give up. And if we don't know that he sees, if we don't know that he hears, if we don't know that he calls us to act with him, we don't know him. So I have a question for you this morning. Do you hear him calling you? He's still speaking just like he spoke to Moses, but he is calling your name now. He is saying the same thing he said to Moses. I have seen the misery of my people. I have heard them crying out. I am concerned about their suffering. I remember my promises. I have come down to rescue them. So now, go. I am sending you. Oh, I know that sounds crazy. That sounds crazy. He's sending me. Sending me. Why would God send me? Why would God call us to rescue anyone? We can't do that. We can't do that. Here we are, hiding away from the world's pain in a self-imposed exile, just trying to get through life, looking after ourselves, kind of like Moses. Maybe we're not so bad, but we're small and we're realistic. It's been 400 years since 1619. Really, we're going to get it right now? It's still not self-evident to everybody that all people are created equal. Come on now. We'd love for things to be different. We wish they were different. They ought to be different, but we don't think it's ever going to be different. And we're sure not qualified to play a significant role. Why? It's just easier to gather in our church buildings or gather online in the middle of a pandemic and to celebrate our salvation and then just wait for Jesus to come and do it by himself. Let him come straighten out the world. Don't get me involved in this. Don't ask me to speak truth to power. Maybe we tried to make a difference once, but we got old and we got wise and we got burned out, and we decided we were going to shrink our world down to the concerns of ourselves and our family and maybe our church and just try to hang on until Jesus comes back because we can't change the world. Moses would tell us, God's not going to accept that. Moses would tell us, be careful with arguing with God about your limitations. Be careful arguing with God about your lack of qualifications, not because God's going to get angry at you, but because he's got an answer for every one of your objections. We say, well, now who am I? And he say, it doesn't matter. It's about who am I. We say, well, Lord, what can I do? He said, it don't matter. I'm going to be with you. We say, well, I don't know enough, Lord. I barely even know your name. He says, I am who I am. That's all you need to know. We say, well, they won't listen to us. And he says, I'll get you a hearing. We say, I'm not a good talker. I don't have the skills. He said, who gave you your mouth? Who gives man his skills? We say, well, just send somebody else, Lord. And he says, you're not alone. I'm not sending you by yourself. You're not that special. No matter what we say, he's got a better answer. He's not going to accept our objection. He will not let us loose. He is determined to use you because you are the only person who can reach the part of the world that you dwell in. And God has called you to join, not in your power, but called you to join. He wants to work through you. God delights in using people who have failed, people who have given up, people who feel washed up, too old, too compromised, too cynical, too guilty, too hopeless. That's who God has always called. He couldn't use Moses when he was 40. Moses was too proud when he was 40. It was when he was 80, when he'd given up. Now God said, okay, now's the time. Because everybody's going to know it's not you. Moses would tell us, when we hear the great I am call our name, it's better to just say, yes, Lord. And this same God who said he knew the suffering of his people, he wasn't just talking. He knew the suffering of his people. And he proved it on the cross when his Son experienced our suffering with us and for us, because in a world of oppression, in a world of suffering, and a world of injustice, God doesn't exempt himself. He comes and experiences it with us. He gives dignity to us in our struggles, and he says, I will triumph through it and over it with you. And nothing is impossible because I can raise the dead. And we cannot follow him if we will not join him. You can't do everything, I know. You can't do everything. Maybe you can't do anything on your own, but God can. But the thing is, once you get to know him, once you've heard his call, once you know about his empowering, you know what you can't do? You can't do nothing. You can't do nothing. You don't have to do everything. Pick something. Pick something. There's so many opportunities to love somebody, so many opportunities to encourage somebody, so many opportunities to bless somebody. You don't have to fix the whole world. Just fix the person in front of you. Do something. Trust God is with you. Choose to be his servant. Open up your eyes to see what God is doing. The fields are wide into harvest. There are opportunities everywhere. You can't go anywhere there isn't somebody who needs encouragement, somebody who doesn't need a good word, somebody who doesn't need to be loved, somebody who doesn't need to hear a testimony of hope, somebody who doesn't need to see that not everybody in this world is given up. Somebody who will go out there in the love of Jesus and the hope of Jesus and be different than the world and say, I believe in a risen Savior, and I believe in a God who answers prayer, and I believe in a God who keeps his promises, and I'm here to prove to you that it's real because it's in me, and we're going to do something. I can't do much, but I can't do nothing. John said in 1 John 3:16, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. But it didn't stop there. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. You can't know the first if you don't do the second. Now, there's this old story preacher's been telling my whole life about a guy who's walking down the beach on a morning, and the beach is just covered in starfish everywhere that washed up on the tide. It just, as far as you can see in either direction, and it just bothers him. All these starfish just out here dying in the sun. So he just starts picking them up and throwing them in the ocean. And people start snickering at him. And this guy says, what do you think you're doing? You can't save all these starfish. You can't make a difference. And he picks up one and looks at it and says, well, makes a difference to this one. And threw it in. You can make a difference to somebody. You can invest in somebody. You can bless somebody. You can wake up every day and say, I'm going to be a blessing to somebody. God, who have you put in my path today? I'm going to speak up for somebody. I'm not going to ignore all the injustice in the world and just hope it goes away. I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something. I'm going to be involved. Last church I preached for in Amarillo, Texas, I went out there. I had this grand vision, and we're going to fix this church. We're going to get this church on mission. Now, I was excited about it, and I had this vision. We're going to be a multicultural church in the heart of Amarillo, downtown. Had all these credentials and titles and all this kind of stuff. And when I got there, here was a fella by the name of Mark Love. Good name for this fella. He didn't have a college degree. He'd gone to some Votech school and was working as a computer programmer, and God broke his heart when his daddy died. His daddy died right on the edge of homelessness, and he wasn't found for several days. And when he saw the condition and the way his father died, it changed his heart. And he said, I cannot live with knowing that people live like this. And so he just started doing stuff. He just started volunteering at the homeless shelter. Next thing you know, he had a ministry. The next thing you know, he'd quit his job and he's doing full-time ministry. He did far more to help that church than I did because he just started doing stuff. See, because you may not know much, you may not be able to do much, but once you know the power of the God who called Abraham, you can't do nothing anymore. Now, I'm not Moses. Not pretending to be. You're not Moses. God is still God. God is still the great I am. God still sees everything that happens in this world. He sees every abused child. He sees every beaten woman. He sees every act of injustice. He hears the cry of every hungry baby. And He still calls us to be His agents where we live, work, play, and worship, and to some points around the world beyond that. And Jesus' words to us are so much like God's words to Moses when He said, "Go and make disciples of all people groups, and I will be with you always to the end." Just like He did with Legion, the man that He drove all those demons out of. He said, "Can I come follow you, Jesus? Can I come follow you, Jesus?" Jesus said, "No, you go home and you tell your family and you tell everybody back in your neighborhood what God has done for you." God wants you to be the evidence to somebody that He knows about them, that He cares about them, that He sees them, that He hears their cry. You can be the answer to their prayer. You say, "I don't know how to do that." You don't have to. You just go be the love of God to that person. And God will give you the words. God will give you the ability. We can't do everything, but when we meet the great I Am, we can't do nothing. And just as He sent Moses, He calls us as His agents of hope to people who have given up on God and given up on hope. Listen, I love what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4, verses 5 through 7. He said, "For what we preach is not ourselves." It's not ourselves. We don't preach the church. We don't preach ourselves. But Jesus Christ is Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made His light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Maybe you feel like you're a clay pot. Maybe you feel like you're just a piece of dirt that was spun on a wheel and isn't even nice enough to be set out when the company comes over. That's fine. God likes clay pots because that way nobody confuses where the treasure is, and the treasure's on the inside. The glory is His. It's not about you. It's about what you contain. And when God's Holy Spirit lives in you, you may be a clay pot, but you contain a treasure. And nobody's going to confuse where the goodness comes from. Nobody's going to confuse where the power comes from. We don't want to distract from the glory of God. Let God's glory be seen in you. But show up. Get involved. Get on the table. God doesn't need your ability. He just needs your trust. Now, I know I probably sound crazy. Maybe I've been out here walking around in the wilderness too long with Moses to talk like this. Maybe I'm out of my mind. But you know, that bush burned. And my heart burned. And Moses left the wilderness and he went back, and Israel left Egypt. And the tomb is empty. And so there is nothing that God cannot do. So when He calls,